Shawn Lassiter, Democratic candidate for the 6th Congressional District in North Texas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So, why are you running?
Yeah, I am running. One, because I've been serving this district for almost a decade now. Started off on the front lines of education as a teacher, a science teacher in Fort Worth, and spent a lot of time there educating students and taking care of their families. And I just watched a lot of our children come in and out of the classroom struggling with issues, food insecurities, homelessness, and for some of my students, not knowing where to go after school because their parents had been deported. And it was those issues that really catapulted me into advocating for students, at a state and local level, to pass policies that would address some of those issues in the school. And so that's what I've been doing in building those coalitions across Texas, but across District 6. And just realizing that a lot of families in District 6 are struggling with the same things that my family struggled with 20 years ago. My mom dedicated her life to teaching students with special needs, and at her retirement made her highest salary of $14,000 a year. As a kid, I didn't really understand that. But as I got older and I talked to more families, those stories are still relevant right now. People are making starving wages and going to work every day, 40 hours, 50 hours a week, and are barely making ends meet. And so when I think about that and I think about my students, I think about, standing up to say that I will no longer sit on the sidelines and watch my families in District 6 struggle and leave it up to incompetent leadership and failed policies, to make change for them. And so I'm running because, I've been fighting for children and families all my life. I'm just taking that fight to Congress.
And let me ask you, as you know, this is a very crowded race. We've got 23 candidates altogether, 11 Republicans, 10 Democrats. And I'm wondering, why should people elect you over the others?
Because I have a proven record of standing up for families in need. I have been fighting my entire professional career here, fighting for families that have been traditionally left out. Equity has been at the center of my fight. I have been listening to families that have been in the margins, poor families, Black and brown communities, who feel like their cries, their pains kind of fall on deaf ears, right? And I have been, championing those voices and centering their voices as our solutions in this district and across the state of Texas. So, I don't know any other candidate that's been doing that every day as a part of their job and their mission to serve their communities. I've been doing that. And so working people in the margins have been waiting for a fighter for them in North Texas and in this district for a long time. And I think it's time now that we elect someone who's going to be putting their concerns front and center. Well, we know that we have majority working families in this district, blue collar families, people who are struggling right now to just, make ends meet. After the pandemic, people lost their jobs in our district. And so we have to get people back to work. And I don't think there's a better candidate than somebody who's already been in the community, listening to them, fighting for them, for the past decade here. And that's what makes me the best candidate. That I don't see any other candidate really fighting for equity in the way that I have in this race.
And so, given that, what are your priorities?
Absolutely. Priority number one is going to be getting people back to work, making sure that we pass legislation that gives people, livable wages, and then fighting for thriving wages. So passing a $15 minimum wage is just basic. Fighting for our right to vote, fighting for our democracy is something that I feel like is at jeopardy right now. We've seen what it looks like to have a country not sure about the way that we're going to move into the future. And so we've seen legislation pop up all across this country that's trying to deny people their right to vote. And so we have to ensure that HR 1, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, is passed in the House and in the Senate. And that becomes the law of the land, and that we send a message across this country that we will be the best democracy in the world, and we will need to do that by passing policies and legislation that says that. The next is, ensuring that people have health care. We have to address health care, and we have to make sure that people like me, you know, a little girl who grew up in the backyard of a paper plant, who played under the clouds of pollution and drank contaminated water, and watch my family members struggle with stomach cancer and die at home because of inadequate health care. No family should have to endure that. You know, our state has the most uninsured people in the country. We have to do something about that. We have to expand, you know, healthcare for everybody. And so I think that's definitely key. I can go on. Of course, education is going to be at the center of the platform, and making sure that kids get back to school, that it's safe, and that they have the adequate resources they need to go off and achieve their boldest dreams.
So you talked a lot about, a variety of issues there. As far as getting back to work and a livable wage, what are you suggesting as far as a livable wage? And do you back the $15 minimum wage bill? And what do you say to critics who say, that's going to hurt people in the sense of small businesses who hire off that are not going to be able to employ as many people?
Yeah, and I think we have to do a better job of addressing all issues. One, we have an issue with working people not making enough income. And so we have to do something about that. Passing a $15 minimum wage is key. But we also have to consider that small businesses won't just struggle because of the $15 minimum, but they will struggle because we've been in a pandemic. They have not received a lot of funding, especially minority-owned, Black-owned businesses have not received the funding that they need to sustain their companies. So we have to do both. We have to both provide a livable wage for working families, and we have to ensure and take care of small businesses. And there's a lot of ways that we can do that. One is that we can invest. I saw something that in research that said that if we just invested in 15% of Black-owned businesses, if we provided them enough funds to hire one full-time employee, we will add $55 billion to our economy, and we will add 600,000 jobs in this country. So we can be strategic in the way that we invest in small businesses to ensure businesses that have been struggling for a really long time have a way out and a leg up. And so I think we have to do both. We have to approach this not from a zero sum, but a both and solution.
With regards to healthcare, what are you suggesting as far as the bill is concerned? Are you talking about expanding the Affordable Care Act? Are you talking about basically Medicare for all? What are you looking at?
Yeah, I'm looking at all options. I think one of the things that I've learned here in Texas is that if we just expand Affordable Care Act and expand Medicare for uninsured people, that would change. I mean, I think it's like 1.3 million people would be covered under this if we just expanded what we already have here in Texas. And I think we're coming up against a deadline. And so we can choose to do that here in Texas and make sure that we are insuring people who are uninsured. So I think there's steps to it. I think I'm going to be working with all people in Congress who believe that healthcare is a right, and that we have to ensure that we are not creating and perpetuating a sick care system, but that we are developing and resourcing a healthcare system. And so I'm going to be working with all people who are wanting to do that and to make sure that people in this country have access to stable, affordable, and consistent healthcare.
You mentioned COVID, and I'm wondering, what is your thought on the vaccine rollout?
I think the vaccine rollout, first of all, let's just name that it is so much better than what it was. I mean, President Biden has come in and actually put together a plan. Hasn't been perfect in every way. There's been some hiccups in equity that I think needed to be addressed right here in North Texas in District 6, where we saw the richer communities, whiter communities getting access to the vaccine early on and being closer to their neighborhoods, where we've seen Black and brown communities not really having that access that close to their communities. We've seen some change in that. More Black and brown people have been vaccinated in the past month. And so I would say that we are on the right track. I think we're getting to the point now that anybody who wanted a vaccine has either gotten it or about to get it. And so now we're seeing that we have a lot of vaccines and not enough arms to put them in. And so we have to go and kick it up a notch into another gear, which is isolating those communities who, identifying those communities who have not been able to get the vaccine, make sure that we're messaging to them and making sure that the vaccines are close to their communities so that they can access it and get it if they need it. So I think we still have work to do, but I do think that we're going in the right direction.
Isn't it a question of people just maybe not wanting to get the vaccine? I think there's been a lot of messaging out there every day to get this, no?
I think it can be broad messaging, but I think there can also be targeted and strategic messaging around how to actually do it. It's one thing to put on TV, everyone should get the vaccine, go to this site, but truthfully, some people need to be walked through the process, and that's okay. I mean, most of our registration for the vaccine right now has been on technology and devices. And I think that sometimes in some communities, they need that touch. They need people to come and show them how to go through the process of getting it. I think that sometimes it feels overwhelming, right, for some people to go through that process and then wait for their name to be called and continuously check it. And so I went through that process myself, and I feel educated. I feel like I'm a part of the working middle class, and I still was a little frustrated checking back at my emails to see, okay, did they say I could come? Like, what do I do with the number? So I think some personal touch. There's nothing wrong with communicating to communities who need that. And also we know that in Black communities, there has been a bit of a mistrust, in even rural communities with the vaccine and the messaging that's gone out to those communities. So it is still our responsibility to bring them back and to say, you can trust us, have faces that they trust, telling them about the vaccine, explaining how to do it. I think going that extra mile matters in ensuring that we get vaccinated.
And I wanted to ask you about the COVID relief bill that passed the House and the Senate. Is that something that you supported?
Absolutely.
And why is that? And do you think more needs to be done?
Yeah, yes, and yes. I supported it because, I think it's important that we both think about what we can do in the short term and what we need to do in the long term. And I think sometimes people can get fixated on one. Long-term solutions and short-term solutions should be happening at the same time. We're in a crisis. So passing legislation to help people right now in a crisis who have lost their jobs, who are having trouble feeding their children, who are about to get evicted and kicked out, like that's a right now crisis. And we have to address that. But we also have to think about the long-term implications of what this pandemic has created and make sure that we're passing legislation to address the long-term issues and inequities that have come up from the pandemic. So we have to do both. But I definitely would have supported passing, unemployment insurance and all the things that bill did. I mean, people needed help right now.
I wanted to ask you about tax increases that President Biden has proposed on the wealthy and on corporations. Where are you on that?
Yeah, I think that we do have to increase taxes on the wealthy. I think one thing that's been encouraging to me is we've seen an extreme amount of CEOs come out and say, we are willing to pay higher taxes if that will mean that our investment is going to be in better infrastructure, if it's going to help our communities, and if it will help people who are our clients. And so that's encouraging that the business side of it also recognizes the importance of a tax increase because it is an investment in our economy. That is an investment in our families, and an investment in our communities. So we have to do that. We've seen crises like the pandemic, but also here in Texas, when we're in the ICE crisis, and when we're all in the dark, that usually during a crisis, the people who have struggled the most burden the cost of that. People who are already struggling saw an increase in their electric bills, right? People who are already struggling saw damages to their homes. Some of those families are right now homeless because they were living in apartments who experienced pipe damage and they could no longer live there. And so they had to go somewhere else. So poor and working people pay the price of failed policies hand over fist. And so what we have to do is ensure that our wealthy companies pay their fair share to invest back in our communities so that we can ensure that working families and poor families get a chance to thrive in this country. So I'm for it. I think we have to work together to get it done.
Wanted to ask you about a couple of other issues, one of them being police reform. And I know what's being discussed in Congress right now is taking away qualified immunity. In other words, making it so that individual police officers are no longer immune from lawsuits. Where are you on that issue?
I agree with it.
Why?
You know, I think about it on a very personal level and then a broader systemic level. But on a personal level, you know, I'm a mom, I'm a Black mom of Black children. And when I think about the kind of thoughts and considerations that I've had to go through to keep my children safe, you know, I don't want any parent to have to endure that. You know, we were all in the pandemic together. Children were at home with their families, and my family was no exception. And I can remember times that my sons wanted to go up the street, maybe a mile up the street to play basketball. And they would ask me, you know, and as a mom, I wanted to say, yes, get out, go play, go have fun. As a Black mom, I had to say no, because I wasn't sure about who they would come in contact with by my front door in the basketball court. And that type of daily navigation for what it means to be a Black mother to Black children or just have Black children, I don't want any family to have to continuously endure that. And what I've noticed is that my story isn't alone. That navigation, that trauma that I experience every day and have to think about it is not an individual story, right? It's one that penetrates throughout our communities all across this country. So what that tells me is that we have a systemic issue, and we have to pass policies that will address it systemically. And I think the George Floyd Policing and Justice Act will help us to get closer to that. One, it takes away the chokeholds, right? The qualified immunity is gone. We have to be able to hold bad cops and cops accountable for costing lives, right? We've seen it happen over and over and over, and we have to do something about it as a country. And I think that the George Floyd Act is the first step in us doing that. And we have to do more, but we first have to pass it in the House and the Senate so that we can, again, you know, demonstrate that our country as a whole will not stand by while our Black communities members are dying one after the other, unarmed. You know, we have to do something about that. And it's up to us at the federal government to ensure that we send a message loud and clear about what we value in this country.
I just want to go back to what you were saying before about your children. Is that a concern over crime in the community?
No, it's a concern over what we've seen, which is little Black children playing while Blacks tend to sometimes be seen. I live more in like suburbia, and what I've, you know, so it's not crime for me in terms of that. We have police officers here in our community that show up, but there is this trepidation around, if my children are seen in a community like mine, they're Black children walking up the street to play basketball, unaccompanied by a parent, will people think that they're a threat? Will they believe that they're in the community unwarranted? Will they call the police on them and say that we have children, Black children, running through our community? That's the trauma, is what will people perceive of them when they walk from my front door to the basketball court? What kind of trouble will they get in? And then will they be stopped? And we've seen children walking from work here in Texas being harassed and asked, why are they in a certain community? And then, you know, being apprehended in a way as if they're criminals. That's what I'm concerned about when I talk about, you know, my children going from the front door to the basketball court. It is those thoughts around policing in this country, but also, you know, the systemic biases of Black children walking through communities, just being Black children and being called a threat. And so those are the things that I have to think about, you know, when raising my children.
Shawn Lassiter, Democratic candidate for the 6th Congressional District. Thank you so much for your time today. We do appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. All the best.
All right. Thank you.